we expect it or not, it will inevitably show up for each of us at some point and demand to be felt. It's not something we can plan for or try to control. So why do we try so hard? When my mother passed away from metastatic breast cancer in our family's home, it was right before my finals week of the fall semester of 2019. She was the only person in this world I felt fully seen by. And our connection ran so deep and felt so innate, it felt as though it had existed for millions of years before I did. And then in just a whirlwind of a few weeks of failed chemotherapies, hospice visits, and phone calls, all the time I thought I had was gone. I didn't think I could bear it, not only on an emotional level, wary of the magnitude of what was about to be felt, but on a highly realistic level. I was a college student, barely 3 semesters in. I had a week of lengthy exams ahead of me. I was in the middle of what was supposed to be the best years of my life. How could I feel all of this and still be everything I was expected to be? I wagered that I could feel my grief, but only a little, and only in a very specific time frame, that 1-month break between the fall and spring semesters, to be exact, where there were no school deadlines to follow or social schedules to adhere to. And only starting after finals week. I honestly couldn't even tell you what exams I took that week or how they even went. I was just so numb. I returned home for the break, back to this place that now housed all these harrowing memories, placed my bags down, and just waited for all the grief to wash over me. I had to get the hard stuff over with, so I could ease into the spring semester on the wings of acceptance, only fond memories and feelings of total peace remaining. But instead, I wasn't feeling much of anything. The numbness continued. I thought to myself, was something wrong with me? This wasn't anything like I had expected grieving to be like. And I was running out of time. I should have been done with denial and halfway through anger by now, according to my master plan. So I'm back at school, feeling disappointed in myself for not taking advantage of the only time it felt safe for me to be experiencing what I was feeling after my loss. My plan of action had to change its course. I was back to being a full-time college girl now, drinking and dancing on the weekends, studying hard, thinking about internships, jobs. No time to be the girl whose mom just died anymore. I told myself, it had been a few months. I should be back to normal. But despite this new plan, that initial numbness began to wear off, and the pain was looking for a place to set in. I wish I could just have a few moments to speak with that version of myself, trying to cry silently into her dorm bed pillow, trying so hard not to feel what she was feeling, trying so hard to just be fine. I want to tell her that we never really did go back to normal, and that was okay. I want to tell her that all those things we were trying so hard not to feel did eventually find us, and we had to endure everything they had in store, and that was okay. And I also want to tell her that it's 3 years later, and we are still grieving, and that's okay. Because what I've learned between then and now is that in order to lead a healing and hopeful life after loss, we need to dismantle these expectations we place around our grieving processes. Our culture is one that stops for no one. It has no mercy for those of us who just need to stop and take a breath for a second. So from the moment we are confronted with a loss, we feel the pressure of all that resides in this normal we must attempt to get back to. We might feel like we need to make this choice between what we need to feel and what we need to do. But we do not need to choose between grieving and living. After all, they are the agents of the other's creation. We grieve because we lived so fully with someone, and we keep living in spite of our grief. They can and will coexist with each other, some days in peace, some days in conflict. But either way, our grief is going to be along the ride with us for quite a long time, and we have to come to terms with that. Like I mentioned, the full volume of my grief found me eventually, even though I desperately tried to hide from it at school. It was that first summer without her, after moving to my first apartment, away from my childhood home, now even further from everything that had ever felt safe and comforting in my life. I remember the day clearly. I woke up, and there it was. It felt as though someone had replaced the blood in my veins with cement. I went for a walk and tried to shake off the heaviness, but it remained. I came home and took a cold shower, hoping it was just some lingering morning fog, but it stayed. Minutes later, I found myself on our living room couch, still dripping hair and towels and everything, just sobbing to my roommate. A months-long catharsis, finally released. And these really dense emotions stuck around for a while. And then they subsided for a bit. And then they would come back, like a tide rolling in. Maybe near a holiday. Maybe near her favorite time of year, spring. Or maybe just because in a Starbucks I saw a woman with her exact cropped haircut, and for a fraction of a second I thought it could be her. That happened 2 weeks ago. I went to my car and cried harder than I had in months over her. And all of a sudden this wound felt uncomfortably fresh. I found myself questioning why, in March of 2022, I was feeling the same level of pain as when I began this process. But this sort of higher knowing I'm working on developing stepped in and reminded me of my own words from the beginning of this talk. That grief is not convenient or something that we can plan or control. It has a wildness to it that decides how and when it wants to show up in our life. And it will continue to do so for as long as I love my mom and as long as I'm still on this planet, which I hope will be for a long time. And in this lengthy relationship we have to prepare ourselves to have with our grief, we're going to encounter a lot of unexpected emotions along the way. I remember around the first anniversary of her death, a friend had a question for me. After giving me one of those, "Hi, I have a question about how you're feeling since your mom died, but I don't know if it's my place. If you don't want to tell me, it's totally fine. Please don't hate me. I love you." Sort of disclosures that people feel as though they need to deliver. And they asked me, "What stage of grief do you feel as though you're in right now?" And I thought to myself, hey, someone did their grief homework. If you do a basic internet search about grief, you'll find that there's 5 stages, each with corresponding emotions: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I answered my friend's question with the truth. I said, I don't know. Because somehow I was feeling things that felt very much out of the confines of just 5 emotions. And even if I was feeling one of the 5 on any given day, it wasn't aligned with that order whatsoever. I do think denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance have their place within the grieving process, but they're most certainly not the whole picture. There are really no limits to what emotions grieving can collaterally manifest in. And when we attempt to box them into just 5 subcategories with no room to consider any deviation, we're discounting a significant amount of the experience of processing loss. But if we were to place these more expected feelings in the center of an emotion wheel of sorts, using them less as ends, but more means to a wide variety of ends, we open up so much more room to validate ourselves. From my own experience and from hearing the experiences of others processing loss, things I would have never thought to associate with grief have been illuminated. Feelings of fear, anxiety, or hypersensitivity, confusion, a loss of identity, or a new need for solitude, guilt, low self-esteem, cynicism, and so many more. And these emotions lie on a highly individualized spectrum. You may feel just a few, you may feel them all at once. All that matters is that they're honored, they're felt, and they're trusted. But I think the stage I tend to grapple with the most is this idea of a final acceptance. Something feels far too ultimate about it, far too aspirational. Like it's some ribbon you get to cut or prize you're awarded at the end. To me, acceptance doesn't feel like something that can only be achieved after all the hard work is done. Acceptance is something that underscores every single moment of the grieving process. We are forced to practice acceptance from the minute our life without whatever we just lost begins. And all of these emotions happen because we are accepting that our person is gone. Even if that emotion is something like numbness or denial, we're feeling that and experiencing it because we're feeling the pain of what is true. But this real, sustained acceptance shows us the power of and. I am accepting that my mother has died. And I am sad and scared and angered about it. This and gives us a beautiful space to heal in, where multiple things can be true at once, the knowing and the feeling, where we can open up ourselves to experience a wide variety of emotions. Because once we practice both the acceptance of our loss and the acceptance of all the fluid, evolving emotions we will inevitably face, we live a fuller life. Those few months I was back at school, trying desperately to shove any shard of my grief below a calm and collected persona, sure, maybe I was able to circumvent some of the really uncomfortable stuff for a while, but food didn't taste as good, music didn't move me like it used to, and I found myself forcing laughter around my friends. When I repressed my grief, I also repressed my ability to be happy, inspired, and truly present. But when we make peace with our grief, we're giving ourselves the permission to be fully human. All of this dissolving of the timelines and specific emotional boundaries we set is rooted in liberating ourselves and our grief from guilt and shame. Now, I fully stand by the philosophy that all emotions have their place and are there to inform us about something, but these two guys are really the least helpful out there. They are consistently waiting to rob us of the validity of our experience, telling us, you're feeling too much. You need to move on and forget about it. You're being dramatic. It wasn't that bad. Guilt and shame have us play countless rounds of what I like to call the Grief Olympics, where we have our experiences go head to head and pit their logistics against each other to see who comes out on top as having the most traumatic situation, and therefore deserves to grieve the most. I find myself doing this a lot when I'm in a more heavy moment with my grief, telling myself things like, well, at least I was 19 years old when my mom died and not 9. At least I could sort of prepare for her death and say goodbye. At least it wasn't both my parents. Anything I can think of to negate my own circumstances. As if grief were some scarce resource, and only the most qualified individuals had permission to feel it all. So if you're finding yourself playing along in these games with your grief, or setting these arbitrarily rigid expectations for yourself, I want to make it clear that we deserve the space and time to feel absolutely everything we need in order to fully process our grief. No matter what your loss may be, a loved one, a close friend, a not so close friend, a pet, a relationship, your health, or anything you love deeply and counted on being there for you. There's no size or significance required to feel the impact of a loss. Especially when we consider the landscape of what we've been through these past 2 years. Everybody has lost something on a personal or global level. So, may we all recognize our capability of breaking down these walls we build around our own grief, to then see our humanity and how much we deserve to both feel and heal in the stories of each other. Thank you.